Welcome. As you can tell, perhaps you can tell, I'm in Tess Beasley's teaching room with her dragon behind me. And it's kind of fun. And that autumn light coming through the mid-afternoon Connecticut trees, it's kind of very nice. And so, but what we'll do to start with, I think, it's always good to start with a little meditation. And we've been looking at the whole notion of, Linji has this thing, wherever you are, take the position of host, and your place will be a true one. We spent a lot of time searching through his copies, translations of his work, and we couldn't find exactly that quote, but there's all sorts of stuff about host and guest, and I'm the person who put it in there, so I'm just going to trust myself that I found it once. and the whole notion of host is what everything depends on, the vastness, the eternity that we rest in and spreads out everywhere. And that's the usual notion about host. And but in English, it's a lot of things in English. So we'll look into some of the other things. The idea of host and guest is ancient in all cultures. That if you're a good host to guests, and it's a huge issue right now because of refugees. And how well do you treat guests? And so, but at the moment, let's just take it as a Dharma thing. When you really rest in a meditation and your thoughts fall away, that's the position of the host. So I'm going to read a couple of poems, and this in some way bear on our theme of taking the part of host. I hope in surprising ways. And this is a poem called Identity by William Merwin. And it's about a painting by an artist in the mid-17th century, mid-1600s, famous painting of a hedgehog. So here you go. I'll bring the hedgehog off. It's a pencil drawing. I think you can see it, right? Not if you can. Okay. When Hans Hofmann, he's the artist, became a hedgehog, somewhere in Germany that has vanished with its forests and hedgerows, Shakespeare would have been a young actor starting out in a country there was only a word to Hans, who had learned from those who had painted animals, only from hearing tales about them, without ever setting eyes on them, or from corpses with a lingering light mute and deathly still forever, held fast in the fur or the feathers, hanging or lying on a table. And he had learned from others who had arranged the corpses of animals as though they were still alive, in full flight or on their way. But this hedgehog was there in the same life as his own. This hedgehog was there in the same life as his own. And if you look at the hedgehog, you can see how thoughtful it is. It's a thoughtful hedgehog. Looking around him with his brush of camel hair and his stretched parchment of sheepskin, as he turned to each sharp particular quill, and every black whisker on the long, live snout, and those flat-clawed feet made only for trundling and for feeling along the dark undersides of stones, and as hands took them in, he turned into the hands that we would see. So, the poem is called Identity, How You Become a Hedgehog. And I'll just read you another poem that's, then I'll hand you over to Tess. This is Po Chu-yi, one of the great Chinese poets, who we went for a walk a couple of times this week along beside a river, and when there are not many people on the walkway, and every now and again the acorns let go here and a few leaves. I don't know about this stuff in California, but it's here and it's exciting. And then I look at the stream flowing, and it's an eternal moment, and there's no way to stop it. Like, it's very hard to get myself to move along and get in a car or something like that, because it's just, the river is flowing and I am the river. It's wonderful. This is poetry. Dwelling in idleness, isolate autumn silence, all wind and rain and visitors rare, the gate stays closed all day and the courtyard cold and quiet. My white horse with its black mane and gold bridled was just sold, and Willow Branch with her gossamer sleeves has gone back home. I can browse through book scrolls when I want some sleep, and sipping at a splash of wine still starts me smiling a little. But my eyes are darkness. So I walk out into moonless nights, and such swollen feet mean no mountains climbed in spring. A mind of silence can't keep stillness from this noisy place. The impulse of change forgotten. That's a peculiar line. The mind of silence can't keep stillness from this noisy place. I think it's really about the way we don't make effort to still things, because that's noise, but I need to check that translation sometime. A mind of silence can't keep stillness from this noisy place, the impulse of change forgotten. It's all a dream of idleness, where yes this and no that, love and hate have vanished into thin air. Nothing left, just an empty life I trust to this world. So, good enough. And I think, Tess, we both found out we had lots and lots of things we wanted to say about this, so I'm going to hand over to Tess before I take up too much time. So.
Hi, everyone. It's interesting how even now I was thinking we're both hosts and guests being here. Like, there's this easy way to assume that you're guests because you're coming into, I don't know, what might be our temple, but in fact, we're also coming into your house. And we're all in some way in this moment entering each other's spaces and being welcomed just by having your camera on, in a sense, and by showing your face, there's an attitude of welcome. And you're being, by looking at all the little windows of everyone else who's here, there's a way you're receiving all these faces and spaces. And so you're, without even trying, you're being host and guest in this moment. And Amaryllis, I remember after one of our early Zoom retreats, Amaryllis said that for days after the retreat had ended, she could still feel like everyone was in her house. And she could kind of imagine looking over and seeing them and talking to them, and all these people still here wandering around and sitting with me, you know. Yeah, and both how it's interesting that one of the walks John and I took, that sense of being the host is just, you know, wherever you are, take the role of host, and that place will be a true place. And like that poem, no more love and hate. And one of these walks we went on, we quickly ran into what looked more like a horse than a dog, this Tibetan Mastiff that was at 10 months old, already significantly larger than its owner, who was this sort of petite British woman. And we're ambling along and kind of talking to them and learning about this Mastiff and how it used to, she got one because when she was a child, her grandmother had one, and the dog would come and take them to school every day and then be waiting for them in the afternoon and take them home. And so she assumed, well, this is what Tibetan Mastiffs do. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these 4 Czech working dogs came thundering down the hill toward this dog, and everyone was immediately confused because the dog didn't know. The dog was 3 times larger than all these other dogs, but they were being much more aggressive, and this whole sort of chaos ensues. And there was an interesting thing where we were right in the middle of it, but we were kind of being the host. We weren't really doing anything. We weren't trying to stop it. There wasn't really anything to do. We were just sort of beholding what was happening. And as it went along, the dog sort of got in the river and out of the way. We wander along with the Tibetan Mastiff, who immediately pulled down his owner and ran away. And for the next 5 minutes could not be apprehended. Probably for about the next 20 minutes could not be apprehended, and ran into a horse who was the biggest animal he'd ever seen. And then the horse pulled its owner down and ran away. And so this scene just went on and on. And but what was interesting was it was just sort of life unfolding. Like the river, we weren't having to fix it. Nothing was wrong. No one was hurt. Nothing needed to be done. It was very easy to feel like something should have to be done, but we were both sort of hosts to that moment and guests to that moment. We were just like wandering into some theater scene that we hadn't realized was happening that day. And then just finding our way, everything calmed down. We went along. And there's something about, I think, the generosity of being both a guest and a host that I was thinking about, and how there's a vulnerability in a sense in each, that when you're welcoming someone into your world as a host, there's a sense of, what might they need and what's happening for them, and what might I actually have to offer. And it's easy to imagine that offering in a sort of standardized way, that it's good to offer something or not. But in a way, it comes out of the moment of whatever we might have. The old Zen poet Santoka Tanada was at the beginning of the 20th century, sort of a wild creature. And he'd never had anything. He usually barely had a place to live, and he barely had clothes on his back. And he was flush with poems always, and so he would give people poems. And he was always flush with friends. He seemed to be very generous in friendship. And there's a story about him that one night he was he had a friend over, but he lived in a hut that had, holes in the walls and not exactly heating and air conditioning, and no blankets for his friends. But his company was so desired that that was sort of what was on offer. And his friend fell asleep, and it's very cold. He can see his friend is cold, and so he takes off his jacket and he lays it over his friend. And he spent the whole night meditating in the crack of the hut to keep the wind from coming in. And as a way that's as a kind of attitude thing with host and guest, no matter what's being exchanged, that there's a generosity of whatever I might have in that moment. And friendship is quite a gift to be able to offer. It's not one that can be forced, but it's quite it's quite an offer of generosity to have genuine friendship laid out on the table in a sense. And to receive it. We were asking my one of the things I usually do before I'm talking is harass my partner about, well, what do you think about this? So we were asking her, well, what about guest and host for you? And she said, well, I find it much easier to be a host than a guest. And we said, well, why? And she said, well, because I'm always worried about troubling people with all my manias. And, my to be sort of vulnerable enough to be in someone else's care and rely on them for what I might need, and not need to bother them and all sorts of things. And I thought, oh, yeah, there's something about being a good guest that can I can I receive whatever's on offer and not think, cultures vary wildly by this, that it's polite to accept, it's polite to not accept, you'd be crazy to. There was I came across this piece written by a translator, poetry translator. She said she spends most of her time somehow between host and guest in languages. But she was talking about many years ago. She posted online, well, what's the strangest thing that's happened to you in being a host or a guest? And this person replied that when they were a child in Sweden, that they were asked to wait in another room while the family had dinner. They were like closed off in another room while the family had dinner. And the whole board went wild with, how is that possible? That's so rude. Can you believe it? Can you? And finally, there was a food historian that said, well, no, in that culture at that time, if you were to feed another child, you would be sort of insinuating that the family couldn't take care of their own child. And so it'd be very rude to take care of them. So that was a great act of generosity to have them wait. And think, well, that's true with all of us, that we're sort of our own culture and customs all the time, that we're trying to meet each other within somehow. And, someone might think it's incredibly generous not to ask a burning question that's available in the field, and someone else might think it's terribly rude to be asked such a question. And so there's this dance we're doing between host and guest at any given moment. I guess the last thing I'll say for now, um, so I want to hear some more of John's poems because they're very good. It's just this interesting sense of being a guest here in this life. As the host is the one who abides, who never leaves. And like in Hestia and the Greek myths, there's someone who never leaves, who just stays home and tends the hearth. And we can step into that person. And then there's the one who's always coming and going. Even in our own minds, we have dozens, if not hundreds, of people and opinions and perspectives that are coming and going. And to somehow appreciate how both host and guest make for a rich life, a rich exchange. So that's all I want to say for now, John. Back to you.
Thank you, Tess. I too was impressed by the dogs on that thing because they'd gotten away from this guy. You're not supposed to, anyway, have dogs running wild. And these were clearly working dogs, and maybe 4 of them, and they're like, and he told us they're Czech line dogs, as if that explained. That was kind of great. And they're kind of a small German Shepherd, but they're clearly meant to, they're not meant for benign things. They're not fluffy dogs. And it was interesting, and I just sort of, and then this Mastiff, who's, I don't know, you've probably seen a place like Tibet and high Himalayas, the dogs like that are used to hold bears out of the crops. So, they're heavyweight dogs, and this one was just a puppy, and I'm sure that line dogs would have, had him for lunch. But I don't know, I still thought that Mastiff was a big creature. So it was wonderful that just the way the world is this intricate, round and round the jewel turns, tinkling like jade, is an old Chinese poem. You just feel it all, the line dogs running down and the guy shouting after them and them getting free and running into the water and the Mastiff then running away and startling a horse and all that sort of thing. And so it was rather wonderful. Here's, I want to read. This is Louise Glick is one of the great poems of the transitions between host and guest, I think. And this is called Night Migrations, which is real feel for the bardos, This is the moment when you see again the red berries of the mountain ash, and in that dark sky the birds' night migrations. It grieves me to think the dead won't see them. These things we depend upon, they disappear. What will the soul do for solace then? I tell myself maybe it won't need these pleasures anymore. Maybe just not being is simply enough, hard as that is to imagine. And here's a great one about, I don't know, I'm claiming this is about host and guest because I thought it was awfully fun. This is Robert Creeley. And I know a man. I said to my friend, because I'm always talking, John, I said, which was not his name, the darkness surrounds us. What can we do against it? Or else, shall we, and why not, buy a goddamn big car? Drive, he said, for Christ's sake. Look out where you're going. Clearly. And I wanted to read, I was talking with I have a new friend, knew Tony Hoagland really well. And I knew him, I kind of loved him, but I knew him as well as I could, given he was dying when I knew him. And Tony wrote this poem, I thought out of conversations in the Zendo and things like that, and he called it Entangle. Sometimes I prefer not to untangle it. I prefer it to remain disorganized, because it is richer that way. Like a certain shrubbery I pass each day on Reba Street, in an unimpressive yard in front of a home that seems unoccupied. A chest-high spreading shrub with large white waxy blossoms, whose stalks are climbed and woven through simultaneously by a different kind of vine with small magenta flowers that appear and disappear inside the maze of leaves like tiny purple stitches. The white and purple combination of these species, one seeming to possibly be strangling the other, one possibly lifting the other up. It would take both a botanist and a psychologist to figure it all out, but I prefer not to disentangle it, because it is more accurate. My ferocious love, and how it repeatedly is trapped inside the fear of being sentimental. My need to control even the kindness of the world, rejecting gifts for which I am not prepared. My inextinguishable conviction that I am scheduled for some kind of destination. I could probably untangle it, yet I prefer to walk down Reba Street instead, in the sunlight and the wind, with no mastery of my feelings or my thoughts, purple and ivory and green, not understanding what I am, and yet in certain moments remembering and bursting into tears, somewhat confused as the vines run through me and flower unexpectedly. So, there we are, hey? I often have things to say, but when I sit, I sort of fall into it. I fall into the vastness and the not disentangling things, and then they don't seem to need disentangling, and my clever thoughts don't seem to be needed either. So I think one of the things about Zen is just to be at rest, that you are the host already, and everything that comes you can welcome, even the things you are desperate not to know about, not to experience. And so that's the nice thing about Zen, is you can include stuff. And so and that sort of slight subtle gestures, W.S. Merwin's early poetry was really good about those subtle sideways moves. In his later poetry, that was harder for him, I think, and he tended to tell you what to think. But This is nice. This is called Finding a Teacher. In the woods, I came on an old friend fishing, and I asked him a question, and he said, "Wait." The fish were rising in the deep stream. The fish were rising in the deep stream, but his line was not stirring. But I waited. It was a question about the sun, about my two eyes, my ears, my mouth, my heart, the earth with its 4 seasons. My feet where I was standing, where I was going, it slipped through my hands as though it were water, into the river. It flowed under the trees, it sank under hulls far away and was gone without me. This is question. It flowed under the trees and sank under hulls far away and was gone without me. Then where I stood, night fell. I no longer knew what to ask. I could tell that his line had no hook. That's a very Chinese note, that one. I could tell his line had no hook, and I understood I was to stay and eat with him. And that's what we really do. We accompany each other. You know? So my thought is to ask a few people, and Tess will ask a few people, or say a bit more. How's that, Tess? What's that sound like? So Alison, I see sitting in front of the beautiful Tara, and and hi.
Hi from California.
I've heard of California. Yeah.
Oh God, those last few lines of the Tony Hoagland poem where he says he bursts into tears. Here I am, like bursting into tears. It's the way it was so beautiful. I mean, I've heard that poem probably a dozen times, but I don't know, for some reason this morning is so moving. And this morning I'm sitting outside where I've got a view of our big maple tree, which is beginning to turn, partly from the season and partly from the heat. We've had this really unrelenting heat event, as they call it. And if you look on the weather maps, you know, they show this sort of ominous looking deep color of red, and you're always getting these notices about excessive heat, and it'll be one more day, and then they say, oh no, it'll be just 2 more days, and then 2 days pass, they say, well, just 1.5 more days. And I think since the moment John left is when the heat dome arrived. It's not going to lift until he comes back, apparently. But every morning I've been getting up because it's so warm. I don't know why I've been getting up this way, but when it's still dark and it's not yet hot, but even today it was 80 at 6:15, and I go for a walk in the mountains, and then when I come home, the very first thing I do is I dump out all the water in the bird bath, and I fill it with fresh water. So I guess, you know, I'm the host to the birds, which are suffering. They sort of disappear during the day, but in the morning they arrive. And this morning during meditation, and the view of probably, I don't know, a couple dozen varieties of birds, including a flicker, which is a bird so extravagantly colored that I long to see it, and this sort of piercing call, but you never see it because it knows even if you're thinking about it and it just disappears. You can hear it though. And then today during the meditation, it was just up and down and all through the maple tree. And so I think it was because of Tony Hoagland's poem. It was there to listen to it. So that's the report from California.
Very good. Angela Rockell is here in the darkness of the pre-dawn darkness of Tasmania. And
Hello, yes. Well, the thing that's been staying with me um, in all of this is being the guest and just feeling, I suppose I've felt as if my life's work in a way has been to try and figure out how to be a guest in place, in country, with everything, everybody else that's here. Um, and in the last weeks here, rather than heat, we've had endless windstorms that have been bringing down trees. Partly it's the equinox, it's every year. Partly it's that every 11 years there is a series of storms on the sun that spit energy our way, and that adds itself to the mix of weather. And then there's just the changes that are happening. So huge storms. And what I notice around where I am is the way, well, it knocks nests out of trees, obviously, but also the little animals really don't like it because they can't hear what's coming, and they're crouching and sheltering. They don't come out to eat. They just wait. And then in the little lulls, you'll see them out urgently digging or grazing or doing what they need to do to eat. And I just feel as though I'm that in the world at the moment. The huge winds that are passing through the world, and I'm somehow crouching, waiting, feeling it moving around me. And that's it, really. So, thanks.
Thank you. Nice to hear what's happening down there. Tess, do you want to select a couple of people that you'd like to hear from?
Sure. George. Boy, have anything you want to say, George?
Hi. Well, yeah, the whole concept of being a host and the concept of welcome at first sparked off something kind of negative. I have a friend who's got a perfect life. He's got a perfectly lovely apartment in Paris and a perfect wife and perfect decoration. He makes perfect sculptures that command perfectly amazing prices. And he's very generous. And whenever you go into his apartment, he says, "Welcome." And yet I react badly to it because somehow the welcome and the generosity, and he is generous, but they're on his terms, they're outward flowing somehow. And they don't feel quite right, although I certainly appreciate the generosity. And in contrast, I think of the welcome afforded by real friends, and the most contrast that I feel there is with several African friends, sub-Saharan African friends from West Africa that I have, whose welcome it seems entirely inward. It's come into my house, come into my heart, and take whatever you need because I care for you and I want you to have whatever you need. And it's an incredibly warm hosting. It's an inwardness, and I think it seems to apply to everything, not just or it could apply to everything, not just friends, just as a way of living rightly. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking about in this regard is how much Zen talks about the appropriate response, or what's often translated as say something in response. Can you summarize the Buddha's teachings for me? Say something in response, and how somehow the mind is always trying to apply standards to that of some kind or whatever, but just to include everything that's part of the situation. There might be some form of generosity, but some other way of stinginess, or of fear, or of holding back, or I was talking to someone recently about reluctance. And the thing is, as you're part of the host place, I guess, why it's a true place is because you can see and feel everything that's part of a situation. And you just think, oh, interesting. And I went to see some art recently, and you can see so much how in the mind, like I can always watch my mind immediately want to go to I like it or I don't like it. That's the first, like, and it's an immediate barrier to whatever might be on offer in a sense. And always, it's really nice when, a particular museum or art space or gallery isn't too crowded and you can actually take the time to just stand in front of something for a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so, and let it just happen to you. And your mind goes so far beyond then I like it or I don't like it. You just think, oh, there's chaos, there's aliveness, it's asking something of me. It's not letting me land somewhere. It's, a true encounter starts to emerge. I guess that's what we're after in meditation, the true encounter. Todd, you have anything you'd like to say?
Hi, everyone. I love that poem, a Tony Hoagland poem. And actually, a number of people have said things already that I think are something about poetry, which lets me be the host of whatever is going on. And I felt that so strongly with the Tony Hoagland poem and the purple and white stitches and that flowing up through me in some way. We can just kind of experience that. And I really liked that poem. And I was almost in tears as well. And then Angela talking about the little creatures huddling, and I could kind of feel that. Earlier today, so today on Sundays is like my chore day where I have to do all the things I have to get done before the work week starts. So I'm taking out the trash and changing the sheets on the bed. And I've also got a lot of things happening at work, and I always am thinking about, how can I solve all these problems? So I'm walking around the house and I'm, trying to get to my chores, and I'm feeling a little just caught up in what's going on in my work and in my industry. I write software. AI is like completely changing the business of writing software. So it's a bit chaotic and stressful right now. And I was kind of feeling that. And so I'm walking down the hall into the bedroom to go change the seats and change the sheets. And I just for a second want to touch something solid. And so I reach out and just brush my hand along the wall as I go down. And I got that sense you can get sometimes where you have that meeting with something real. Just from the touch of my fingers going along the wall and touching the door frame of the closet. And I just was like, yes. Here is what's happening. My hand along the wall. And so I go into the bedroom and I'm making the bed, and this is what's happening. I'm making the bed. And I it was a really comforting, nice feeling to have that stuff just be there and be so real and so present at that moment. And I kind of had this thought, like, it's not that everything in the world is happening to me. It's more like I am whatever's happening in the world. And it kind of feels like being the host to that. Whatever is happening is me. And that's what I am. And that's what I'm experiencing. And so I felt a lot of that during our little temple this morning. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Todd.
Too lazy to be ambitious, I let the world take care of itself. 10 days' worth of rice in my bag, a bundle of twigs by the fireplace. Why would I want to chatter about delusion and enlightenment? Here's the eternal moment. Listening to the night rain on my roof. Listening to the night rain on my roof. I sit comfortably with both legs stretched out. George Foy just sent us a couple of lines with a complicated provenance, but it goes, here at the front, it sounds very Chinese in a way, here at the frontier, there are falling leaves. Although my neighbors are all barbarians and you are 1,000 miles away, there are always 2 cups on my table. So even the feeling of loneliness is the eternal moment, you know, the feeling of welcome and loneliness. John Joseph, do you want to have anything you want to say?
Well, I'm having some technical difficulties, so I don't know if you can if you can hear me. But I got a new set of AirPods, and they're not syncing with my computer, so I'm only listening. I can only hear about half of what's being talked about. And at first, I was kind of annoyed coming in that I wouldn't be able to hear much, and I thought, well, that's for a guest like. And I thought, what would the host say? What would the host do? And just a little bit of muffled talk, and then Tony Hoagland, and then a little bit of flute, and a little bit of comment from here and there, and the host was okay with it. You know, it wasn't a problem, and so yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Fortunately. Tess, what do you want to say? Do you want anybody else to speak, or we've just got a few minutes, and I'm kind of happy to be doing this together and with everyone.
I was thinking about speaking of that. I guess the last thing I'll say is I was thinking during the meditation just how much, I don't know, the teaching of the Dharma or the sharing of the Dharma or the everything itself just comes out of that same spirit, that you reach here in some way, and that how powerful the urge is to want to share it. And the wider and wider circle by which you experience, you're sharing it in some way. But opening the doors to here feels like in that vein of friendship. And yeah, it's nice to just be bathed in it. I think that's all I have to say.
Very good. So one of the things I noticed is I could just when I stopped having questions about whether we could make Zoom work or things like that, which didn't seem to be a question really. It was like we had to talk this way or we couldn't talk. So it's easy answer to that. And but how, if I'm really here beside the river, the Hermann Hesse sort of moment, you know, watching the river. There's also the sages up on the mountains, the Chinese hermits, people like that. Then I can be really here, the places in which I'm here and full of love and joy and love for everyone here. It keeps moving out, you know. Technical difficulties are not an interruption. In fact, even sorrow or loneliness are not interruptions. They're this part of the nobility of being alive, you know. Just take the position of host, and the place will be a true one. Host, whatever this is, all that's going. If you were just born or you're dying, the position of host is the true one.